folks. So I wanted to do a video prompted by a conversation that I sort of spied on in some divinatory Facebook group, which are ones of the ones that I forget I'm in and then see a post and read and feel inspired to do a video about. So this is a specifically Lenormand related video. And what I want to address is the mandate that you see in most Lenormand landscapes, where the partner card, the man and the woman, you and the other, they, them, however it's addressed in modern decks or old decks, that the partner card always is a person, always is another person. If the person is single, it represents someone coming into their life. If they're not single, whoops, damn it, I hate when that happens. Drives me nuts. I really want a different setup. But anyway, what was I saying? Oh, that it always represents another person. And so if you're doing a reading for a woman, the man card or the other card would always represent someone coming into their life, a significant other, or someone important in the scheme of things. And that to me has never flown, never made sense, never worked for me. One of the main reasons why I found Lenormand sort of limiting over the years is that alone. And we talked about this in the workshop, if you watched any of those videos. What is the partner card if it's not another person? And, none of us really had a particularly good answer. The feminine, male aspects of people, etc. But that didn't really, and it's never really kind of answered the question for me either. But I was thinking this morning that, of course, it doesn't have to be another person, because, of course, other people are not our only goals in life, and so there is a way to read the person card, the second person card, whatever you choose that to be, as a significator for really anything that's important to you. So I'm going to demonstrate that in this spread, which I'm going to do for myself, which is something I rarely if ever do. I don't think I've ever done a grand tableau for myself. I'm going to do a grand tableau just to demonstrate this. So you can represent anything important. Now, if you think about why there are couples in the Lenormand deck, it's because, of the time, being partnered, being coupled, being married was sort of the requirement. You know what I mean? It was that, or the convent, or the priesthood, or jail or whatever, spinsterhood, you know what I mean? So you were definitely an oddball if you weren't coupled, if you weren't married. And if you didn't marry well, of course, that could spell ruin. Sorry, I'm dropping things. So, of course, that would be a top priority, but it's not necessarily the top priority for people. And even if they're interested in a love life, it's not the top priority in every reading they want. And so there are going to be times where we're going to read for people who don't particularly have interest, or who are not necessarily interested in another person's influence on a situation, but who are interested in chasing a particular goal, something desired for, someone, sure, something desired for. And in this case, we're going to do a reading for me, and I'm going to allow the woman card in this case to represent something that isn't a person, just to demonstrate this. Now, of course, to me, this makes total sense now that it's occurred to me, which it did this morning, because, when I read Sibylla, there's the wife card. And there's not a man card and a woman card. There's the wife, and there is a great lord card, which you could sort of assume is the man, the representative of the man. There's also two lovers, the man and the woman lover. When I read Sibylla, though, and it's a situation where there isn't really a relationship going on, the wife, to me, will often represent something partnered, or the partner of something, which could be a person, it could be a business relationship, it could be a company, mentor, although the mentor would probably be the scholar in that case in that deck. But you get what I mean. And then two lovers would be something longed for, something desired, something wanted, or attraction to, or for something. So that's how I read that. And so it made sense to me thinking about that in Lenormand. Like, why couldn't the opposite card represent the thing that's longed for, or the partner of, even if it's not a person? Now, we have cards that will represent certain things like love, romance, there are work cards, there are money cards, etc. But in making those cards do double duty, readers often get confused because it's like, in this reading, does the anchor represent hope, work, longevity, being stuck? I don't know. And that's where I think a lot of folks get stuck in a lot of different kinds of readings. So you have to know going in what your significators are going to be, regardless of the kind of reading that you're doing. And I think that's especially important in a grand tableau, and it's one of the reasons why I've come around on Lenormand recently, is the idea that because, I think the main thing that separates Lenormand from tarot to me right now is that Lenormand is one of those rare systems where you're going to use every card in the deck. And to me, if I'm going to do a Lenormand reading of any kind, I'm going to use the grand tableau, because why not? You know what I mean? It is the thing that is specifically Lenormand to me. It is the benefit of this particular system in that it's 36 cards, and it's easy to use every card in the deck, and every card in the deck may or may not matter in a reading, but it's going to get a chance to play. It's going to get its chance to sing in the chorus. But because of that, we may need cards to do double duty in some situations, which is why the snake is often traditionally considered the other woman, and the rider the other man, for example. But again, if we specify what we're looking for prior to setting out a reading, then we can do that, And frequently when I do work-based readings, I will say, okay, in this case, the bear is going to represent the job, the tower is going to represent the employer, and, the fish, the finances, etc. But like any other reading, when I sit down to shuffle, I already kind of know which significators I'm looking for in a particular case. And I think that's important. It's like setting your intention for a tarot reading, for any other divination. You know what you're going in doing. And if you're going to use a significator, in tarot, you don't sort of randomly pick it generally after the spread is laid. You pick it before you're going to shuffle, So, we have the benefit in Lenormand of 2 cards that have no inherent meaning, and so that means they can be placeholders for other things. I will always use the primary person card, regardless of what deck I'm using, to represent the person I'm reading for. That is another sort of uniquely Lenormand thing that feels appropriate. If we're looking for another person, if we're looking for a relationship, or if we're reading about a relationship, or some kind of partnership of some kind, then of course the other person will represent that person. But it could represent a job, it could represent a career, it could represent a desired goal, or it could just represent the thing that's important. You know what I mean? Like if you're thinking about, moving to Colorado, then the other person can be Colorado. The ship and the rider might represent moving, but the man card in this case represents Colorado. It is the destination or the thing that you want, the thing that you're moving towards, or the thing that you're searching for in the reading. So I say it's perfectly fine, even though it's not canon and the gatekeepers are going to come for you, to say before you shuffle and draw the cards, the woman card in this reading is going to represent you, and the man card in this reading is going to represent Colorado. Or AT&T, or any other thing that feels like it's the reading. You know what I mean? If you're doing a reading about a lawsuit against, a class action lawsuit against AT&T, I don't know why AT&T just popped into my head. The birds represent communication, but, the tower might represent a company. But you can have those cards do other things in the reading if you decide that the partner card represents the company that you're suing. For example. So it's not to say you have to do this, but just like it doesn't have to be another person, it can be another entity, it can be another thing, another goal, and then that frees up the other cards to do what they do better. You know what I mean? So let's do a reading. So if you know my channel for a while, you know that I have a lot of irons in the fire. And one of those things is that I'm a playwright. I've been writing for the theater for years. I have a degree in it. And just before the pandemic, I graduated from grad school and also finally left a playwriting residency I had locally because the time had come for me to stop watching the leader of the pack, the runner of the show, treat people like shit, including me. During the pandemic, lots of things locally came to light about different organizations and people who had been engaging in predatory and abusive behavior, and that's a story that you'll hear kind of all over the place in the theater world. I have had to step back and say, how do I navigate the fact that I love making theater, but that I can't stand the industry and many of the people who are in charge of it? And I've sort of wondered over the past few years, is this done? Is it over? You know what I mean? Did I go to grad school for nothing? Did I hook my wagon to a poisoned star? That's a clumsy metaphor. So the question that I'm going into this grand tableau is like, what's my relationship to, what's the healthiest relationship to being a playwright? And so in this case, the woman card is going to represent that thing. My career as a playwright and the future of that. And then that allows me to look at where I am, where the woman card is, and then all the other cards in the spread. Now, the book, you could say, represents playwriting or represents a script or whatever, and that may color the reading overall. I'm going to look for the relationship between the idea, the career, the potential for being a playwright as the woman. The book card will mean something bookish. In the spread, it'll represent writing, the letter can represent writing, etc. I'm going to want to know the relationships to those cards and also the houses they sit in order for that to make sense. But the real answer I'm going for is, what's the healthiest relationship for me in the future with playwriting, with theater? And maybe that's a clearer way to say it. So I'm going to shuffle, and, again, I'm not going to try to make this video too long. I think you can read a grand tableau relatively quickly if you have a particular question you're looking for. Jesus Christ. Alright, we're back. Lights have stopped falling. That's probably an omen, although it happens all the time, so I guess it's not. Where was I? Let's get the camera straight. I fucking hate when things go crazy. It makes me really cranky. Alright, it's just that my apartment is such chaos, and I need to, invest time in sorting it out, but when I have free time, I don't want to spend it organizing things, because I'm not a Virgo. Alright, let's recenter. Alright. I use this particular deck because I may be able to zoom in closer, although it may have the obverse effect, the opposite effect, and make it harder to see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But luckily, it's a pretty clear-looking deck, which is another reason why I chose it for this case. It's this is one that's really good for grand tableaus because it's small. So there am I. There I am. There am I. And there's playwriting. So out of the gate, there's already an interesting relationship in the fact that we're moving in different directions. And you could say, if you read, positionally in terms of future and past, that the playwright is way in the past. All right, so I'm not going to well, maybe I will. I was going to say I'm not going to take you through all the techniques for reading a grand tableau. Can I zoom in on this in any way that makes it easier for you to see? I think that's as much as I can get in this case without fucking everything up, which I may do anyway. All right, stay. So, there are things people do to start off with. They'll look at the first 3 cards, which in this case would be ship, coffin, and fish. They'll look at the last 4 cards down here as a special message. There we have bear, mice, clover, and house. I tend to find neither of those things very interesting to me when I start reading a grand tableau, particularly with a question, but even without one. If I'm doing a general reading, I'm going to go right to the significator, see what house they're in, and see what's around them. And then I'll look at the various other significators and see where they lay. So I am in the house of the fox, which is an interesting place for me to be. And I am surrounded by clouds, key birds, lily, tree, whip, road, and heart. So that's the first place I'm going to see. I live in the house of the fox in this particular reading. Other cards that I'm going to pay attention to, of course, are the woman, in this case, which is the playwriting as a career. She's in the house of the stork. So that's interesting. I'm going to look for the house of the book, which is in the house of the sun. I'm going to look for the letter, which is in the house of the book. So those are some interesting things right out of the gate, right? I'm just looking for sort of things that seem appropriate to theater, to writing, and that is going to sort of help guide me as I go through. They're not shouting at me yet, but that's not where we are, right? We're just getting a sense of the lay of the land. This is all stuff that if I were reading for someone else, I would do quietly. I wouldn't talk about. I'd just kind of make mental notes of this. Incidentally, I never am able to remember the positions in the Grand Tableau, so I always have a cheat sheet nearby so I can see what house is what. It just makes it easier. So this is my goal, or this is my thing. This is the thing that I'm trying to figure out my relationship to. And so that's a few things that I want to begin with now. I want to look, first of all, at intersections between me and the thing that I'm longing for, or the thing that I'm reading about. So we intersect at the house of the cross, which is, at the cross, which is in the house of the flowers, and we intersect at the path, which is in the house of the lily. So, some interesting things there. The cross being in the house of the flowers and the path being in the house of the lilies doesn't tell me a whole lot, but the fact that the intersection points are what they are tell me quite a bit. So the religious fervor for which I held theater in regard, and the path that I thought it was taking me on, these are things that are very, very clear to me. It is. I think in a Grand Tableau, a card can mean more than one thing at the same time. Like, the cross to me is a blessing and a curse in this particular case. It was a thing that I loved a lot. It was also really burdensome. It was a road that I loved a lot, but it was one that just never seemed to go anywhere. Does the houses now offer me a little bit here? Yeah, I mean, the flowers in the house of the cross, it's sort of in a way, both the lilies, the house of the lilies and the house of the flowers, give me kind of a religious feeling, a sort of devotional feeling. You give flowers to things that you are devoted to people that you are devoted to. Churches are full of flowers. You give lilies to things that you honor and revere. They're also, to me, a very funereal flower. So those are both things that might color the reading, but these two cards at the intersection points of me and this thing that I love, my beloved in this case, which is my life as a playwright, they intersect at really interesting points, very kind of connected by that sort of religious devotion I had to it because of the lilies, because of the flowers, because of the cross. And it was always sort of a question for me in a lot of cases of, am I making the right decisions when it comes to my theatrical career. So it describes the relationship, which to me is something that's helpful as a reader, because if I can verify that that's so, it grounds me and it helps me understand that I'm in the right cadence for this particular reading, which it does. So some interesting things that happen intersectionally. Now, another thing that I notice is that the woman card in this case, which represents theater or playwriting, does not make a whole square. And she's looking towards something unseen. Now, you can take that to mean that it's in the past, but I asked a specific forward-looking question. So, what should my relationship be? Now, that could mean I have to leave it in the past, but I don't know that yet. So, I'm going to look now at the sort of the column where I am. And I also want to point out that there's a very strong position for the paths here, because it's also in the column or the row of the woman or playwriting. So this is a particularly powerful spot. We have key, man, paths, writer, and house. So what does that tell me? You know what I mean? On my mind, I would say, is unlocking this thing of like, how do I move forward? You know, how do I find the answer to this question? And the key is in the house of the clouds, and it's right next to the clouds. So, you know, and the bird in the house of the snake is really interesting up here. So there's this sort of like feeling of like this anxiety around this love being eaten alive, you know. So that's an interesting little thing here at the top. But key, man, road, rider, and house. This doesn't speak to me that interestingly, but that's again because I haven't dug into it yet. So the key, I would say that just signals to me the fact that I really want to find a solution to this, because I really deep down am what I've been doing. But there's a long journey. The paths in the rider is interesting, especially connected to the house. So it's like you keep treading the same ground in the same confine. You know, there's this quality of like you keep going in the same direction into the same safe environment. You're not really on a path towards anything kind of dangerous. Now, it's worth knowing that a theater is often called a house. And so that's contextually an interesting thing for me too. And interestingly, the house falls in the house of the cross. So God, you know what I mean? The layers of like fucked uppery here. So it would tell me that I'm still on this road towards loving this thing, or to being in this thing that I have this very messed up relationship with. Now, is that the right way to go? I don't know yet, but that's kind of where I am. Looking at where I'm going, we have tree and flowers. Trees in the house of the bear, flowers is in the house of the stars. And that suggests to me in a way, like the tree in the house of the bear is just this very rooted, deep, heavy, strong thing. And I think it says you can't just not be the thing that you're so grounded in. Even if it is kind of a pale, withered bouquet, which is just me being funny. It's the direction you're going in. You know, you're still devoted to the flowers in the house of the star. You're still devoted to this thing, whether you like it or not. That's where you are headed if we look at this as where I'm going, because that's the way I'm facing. So, you know, there's that. I'm now curious about the rider, who is a movement-oriented card in my column, and has a lot ahead of them. I tend to not worry about like what's before or after from left to right. I tend to look at what the person is looking at and what they're not. And the rider is headed toward the scythe, the moon, the tower, the letter, and the ring. Letter in the ring right out of the gate makes me think about an eternal bond with writing. But the scythe comes along and cuts at the moon and the tower. Where are we in terms of house? The scythe is in my house. It's in the house of the man. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, it's in the house of the woman. So the moon is in the house of the man. So this is interesting. So the thing that the scythe is in the house of the thing that I want to figure out. Theater, right? So cut in that house. Interesting. But the moon reminds us of cycles, and the moon is in my house. And we intersect at the stork. So there's like, again, a kind of cyclical thing, because storks always return to the same place. So I think this is reminding us again that like I may not be there now, but likely I will be again, because I am a stork who returns to my habitat inevitably. You know, so there's that. And the woman, the theater card is in the house of the stork. So there's this inevitable thing of like, you know, what's the healthiest thing or the best way to approach my relationship? What the reading is telling me now, right now, is that I'm going to return to it. I'm going to keep returning to it, because it's where I'm rooted and it's the thing that I'm devoted to. Now, is that healthy? I don't know. We have to find better answers for that. But what I'm getting out of the spread so far is that this is the thing I'm going to return to, because it's in the house of the stork. This relationship between me and the house of the stork ties so closely into things in this reading. So, you know, these are strings of cards that are sort of giving me a clue as to the fact that, you know, I may say I want to cut ties with theater altogether. You know what I mean? And I've got my scythe in the house of the theater, of the woman. And it has a very close relationship to the house because they're sort of very close to each other. And there's a diagonal that we could read if we wanted to. But the scythe is also very close to the whip and the clover. There's again a repetition to be had with the whip, and the clover is something kind of small. So like whatever cutting I may think I'm doing, I'm still only hacking away slightly at the house. There is an interesting bottom here now that I see. An interesting bottom, hello. Bear, mice, clover, and house, which is like the bear as this big thing. The clover, there may be some like infection, but it's a little infection in the house, in the sense of like, I'm only going to allow it to make me so sick, or have such an impact on it. And the bear actually is moving away, if that means anything. The bear is in the house of the key. Remember, the key's in the house of the clouds. They intersect at fish, which is in the house of the ship. So there's kind of a fluidity there towards kind of biding our time through this, but sort of remaining kind of strong and powerful. The mice is in the house of the fish, which is interesting too, because I think it suggests that any forward motion that I have in this particular realm is relatively small. And the clover's in the house of the anchor, which says to me a lot about the power of the anchor. Where's the anchor? Anchor's in the house of the heart. Really interesting. The clover and the anchor intersect at the whip. The whip is in the house of the mountain. So, there's this kind of self-flagellating quality, but that eventually the path goes toward the thing that's loved, because it's what it's tied to. Path, loved, tied to. And the relationship between the heart and the anchor is interesting because the anchor is in the house of the heart. The heart is in the house of the mice, which brings us right back here. So there's an infection in the heart. The love is tainted. And also they intersect at snake, which is in the house of the garden, which is this feeling of like Adam and Eve, loving the garden, making a commitment to the snake, It's the snake's an interesting character in Lenormand in that it is both positive and negative, but it is a twisted thing, and it is much like my relationship to theater. So, I have a pretty good description of myself at the moment, but I always have to come back to the question and figure out what is the answer to the question, which I have not yet done. I have looked at a fair description of where I am and kind of where I'm headed. But the question wasn't where am I headed, it's what's the best place to be headed. What's the healthiest or the most progressive way to be headed. So now I have to kind of do a couple things. I want to look for cards that I associate with progress, and look at their relationships. And I also want to focus a little bit here on the woman card, which I have not done, again, other than that they're in the house of the stork. What is surrounding them? Again, there's nothing, they're not looking at anything in the future. They are surrounded by the cross and the ring, which suggests, again, this kind of eternal devotion to. And the ring is in the house of the ring. So that sort of amplifies the ringness of the ring. I'm also there surrounded here by mountain, star, and letter. Star is the direction, it's the place we're going. I talked about sort of being devoted to here with the flowers, offering the flowers to the star because the flowers are in the house of the star. The star here is in the house of the dog. But it's the direction, and there's a loyalty to it even though it's a big pain in the ass to deal with. Writing is a pain in the ass, but it's also the direction you're going in. The mountain is in the house of the scythe, which in a way kind of balances itself out, kind of like neutralizes to me the mountain, because the scythe kind of cuts down the barrier. And it also goes toward the sun, and then the stork again, which becomes a really powerful card for this particular reading, just representing the thing that it comes back to. So again, this kind of describes the situation. The tower is not really in the path here, but does connect Tower, Child, Star. This kind of represents the institutionality of things, and it is in the house of the letter. So there's this interesting relationship here. Letter in the house of the book, So writing, writing, book, book. Tower in the house of the letter, connecting it to writing. So there's the institutional relationship there. And that intersects with the woman with the theater card at the child, which is in the house of the tower. There's a little bit of a naivete there in terms of, I would say perception-wise, of the institution, that it's not quite as powerful as it appears to be. Now that begins to give me the first new message that unlocks kind of a path forward, right? Something when I said that goes yoink, and as a reader I'm sort of like, oh right, the institution may not be as powerful as we think it is, even though this whole column has the bear at the root of it. This interplay here between the tower, the letter, and the child, with the letter in this being this house, sort of kind of negates the power of the institution. The institution's power reminds me to look at the key, which we come back to here. Now this is all very, it's much easier to read for other people. Like I'm looking at the time in this video, and it's getting up there. Although I talked for a little while. But this begins to unlock for me a healthy thing. You know, the diminishing the power of the institution seems to be key. Everything is sitting on the bear, in a way, but the cards that come above it, we have fish, which is sort of that fluidity, sun, which is kind of the quintessential good card, but it's in the house of the whip and the broom, which can make it negative. But I think that just, you know, this kind of reminds me of like the fickleness of the spotlight, you know, and that, you know, the fluidity of the spotlight, the fickleness of the spotlight, and the heat of the spotlight on the institution is kind of showing its inevitable like immaturity and its weakness, which is kind of, you know, the power, I would say, its own power was the fact that it seemed so much more powerful than it is, if that makes sense. Now, part of that is just life context, and I know that. So I've now kind of looked around the woman. I'm starting to get a sense of things that are helping me understand a mature way forward, a healthy way forward. So other cards I'm going to look at when I think about a healthy way forward are going to be the tree, which is here. I already looked at it, and it's in the house of the bear. So this is sort of our well-being card, in essence, and it's very close to me. So that's kind of a good thing. I also talked about this earlier, as how this sort of, it's a deeply rooted thing that you're going to keep moving towards because you're devoted to it. But let's look at what's surrounding it. We've got the birds, the tree, the heart, and the book. The heart in the book, to me, again, kind of unite the idea that this relationship between writing and me is not something that is easily cuttable. And the birds, even though we think about the birds as sort of anxiety and chatter, they're also communication, you know? And so, like, this is sort of a root issue. Now, the birds, as I said, are in the house of the snake. So it makes things more complicated because it's not just as simple as being communication. You know, the snake is a predator and it can eat the birds. But despite that, the tree, you know, is here. It's like So what this is telling me, in a nutshell, I could keep going on forever, is that you can't not be the thing you were. You can't give up the thing that you're devoted to, but you do have to negate its power somewhat so that you're able to get your own back, in essence, and learn to love the thing that you're devoted to in a way divorced from its toxicity. That's where I kind of land, just in terms of, you know, making this brief. I could keep digging deeper, and that's kind of the joy of the Grand Tableau for sure. You know, there are other interesting relationships that I could explore. I talked about the Rider as a motion-based card, but that led me to the place here where I got here. The ship, coffin, and fish, to me, is a combination that makes me think a little bit of how even though movement seems stalled, the water still flows. The coffin is surrounded by two water cards, the fish and the boat. And in a way, it's like being in the cabin in the boat, but the boat's still moving. Those are things that really kind of underscore a lot of readers, the first three cards. The corners often for a lot of readers. In that case, we have ship, dog, garden, and ring. And again, that sort of suggests the sort of devotion to this journey, the devotion to the publicity in a way, and the commitment. It's a cycle of commitment. So I don't need every card. I did read most of them. I didn't really look at the fox. The fox intersects, interestingly, with the snake and the bird, and the heart also intersects with the snake and the bird. And so that's an interesting dynamic, because we have these two sort of fragile things, the bird and the heart, and the fox and the snake intersecting with it. Both predatory cards coming to eat the prey. That's an interesting combination. The fox is in the heart of the house of the heart. So there's again, this sort of love-hate relationship to the predator. And we talked again about the fact that the snake is in the house of the garden, which again, the garden's always full of snakes. And this reminds me, you can't escape shitty people in any environment you're in. You know what I mean? It's just that this one means so much that you're sort of more aware of the shitty people. But it does seem to say that the way forward is accepting your love for this thing, and that you are devoted to it and you're going to be doing it, but you have to negate the institution somehow and diminish its power. Whatever that means. And it's, I would say very practically a thing of shining a light on its cracks. I come back to the sun. And the book is in the house of the sun. So that may even mean writing about shedding light on it, is another way to deal with diminishing its power. This is why I like the Grand Tableau so much. And it's also why the woman doesn't need to be a woman and the man doesn't need to be a man. It can represent a thing, in this case theater or playwriting. There were other houses that were colored by that meaning. The theater as a house, the institution of theater. Those were big ones, you know what I mean? The stork took on really interesting meaning, in part because theater sat in it, and storks are migratory birds that return to the same spot. And the stork is in the house of the birds, so they have a relationship. And there's anxiety around this whole thing, and it does feel like it's being constricted. The snake constricts the birds. That's how it kills them. It sucks the life out of them. You have to escape the snake's grip. But it also meant something twisted in this particular case, which my love and relationship to theater are. So, in this case, the letter in the book didn't really mean secrets or knowledge or communication. They represented writing, because I'm a writer, But they weren't being a playwright. This was. So, this reading tells me there's no getting out of it. So navigating it in a way where you diminish its power over you is the goal. But again, this could represent anything you want it to be, or this, depending on what you're using as the person you're reading for. This could be anything desired, longed for, wanted, focused on, and the cards around it can help color that too. And you can do that with anything, you know what I mean? I did kind of go in knowing that this was going to represent my career as a playwright. There are a lot of different ways to read this. And if you come from a system where, this being behind me means that it's over, and certainly you could read it that way. The coffin is in the first three cards, you know what I mean? The coffin and the cross have a tight relationship. The mountain blocks the sun, there's all kinds of ways you could read this to say that it's over, but that negates other parts of the reading in the way that I read. So you're all going to have ways of accessing this. It's not that you copy what I'm doing or what anyone else is doing. It's that you find your way in. And when you don't have a significant person in a spread, the significator, the other card, does not need to be another person, if that does not make sense. There is no one person that is keeping me from theater. There is no one person that is impacting my life as a writer. It would not make sense if this represented someone else in this particular reading, because it's representing a whole institution, a whole idea, a whole thingness of the thing that I have dedicated myself to. This is representing the culture. This is representing the building. But this is representing being a playwright. This is representing writing. This is representing writing. Does it matter that they're different? In this case, no. You know what I mean? Because they're both writing, and this is a reading about writing. So I want as many cards to talk about writing as I can. You know what I mean? That makes sense here. It doesn't make sense in every reading, you know? But it's all about context. So know going in what you're reading about, and that makes it easier to figure out which version of the tower you're looking at. It makes it, you know, any writing here to me is represented by the letter in the book. It doesn't mean the kind of writing. You know, the fact that there was writing in the house of the sun and there was writing in the house of the book was important to me in many ways, because it just indicated the bigness of that thing. Writing in the house of writing, writing in the house of the sun in the house of the whip and the broom, the whip and the broom in the house of the mountains. You know what I mean? These are all things that make me go like, okay, you know, these confirm either what I know or what I suspect is going forward. They all confirm my thesis. But the idea that this always has to be revealed secrets and this has to be unknown secrets, for example, doesn't make sense, because I'm not dealing with secrets. I know all the reasons why. And the reading reconfirmed all the reasons why. But the answer is, what do I need to do to, what's the best relationship to go forward with? And that was something else entirely. You know what I mean? And so I needed the cards to do a certain thing. But then in this case, the scythe kind of represented what it always does. In another reading, I may have looked at the relationship between the scythe and the moon, because these both indicate cycles of things. This is a harvest. This is a cycle. So we're in harvest season. You know what I mean? So if I'm looking at timing, this relationship would tell me autumn, right? But that doesn't mean much, because I'm not thinking about timing in this reading. You know, that we're in the cycle of autumn if we want that to be the focus of the reading. Or if the question were, when should I dip my hands back in writing? Autumn would be a good answer, because I'm looking at a particular time period. And the fact that the sun is hidden by the mountains is another way of sort of indicating that, yoink, the sun is being blocked, so that's a colder time. And the stork, you know, its cycle, you know, so I could look at another way. It's sun, stork, and lilies. You know, the stork is a cyclical card. And so summer, maybe, or spring in that case, because lilies are a spring flower. So whatever, you know, whatever context you have, but like in this reading, that didn't make sense. It doesn't matter, because I'm not interested in timing. I'm interested in a what. I'm looking for advice here. So, I could keep talking about this for days, but the main point is that this card was not another person. It became a significator for something else. It didn't have to be this. I could have used the book or the house. You know what I mean? But I had this card, and I'm not dealing with any other person in the reading. You know, if I were like, how do I get a literary agent? Then this would be the agent. But that's not the question I asked. So, it doesn't have to be a person. It can be a thing, an idea, a concept, something longed for, something explored, something wanted, something not wanted. How do I avoid getting fired? You know, this could represent the idea of being fired. Even though this card represents cutting, I would want to look at the relationship between the idea of being fired and the card that fires. Right? This is the gun in this case. And so how do I avoid being fired? Well, I'm going to start looking at the relationship between me, the card representing fired, and the cutting card, for example. And the coffin card, which is another card, right? So then I start looking at, I mean, the intersections are the same because I haven't shuffled differently. But then they take on different meaning. You know, the cross takes on different meaning. The paths takes on different meaning. The scythe takes on different meaning. So I have to read it differently. Because context changes everything. Anyway, I'm going to finish up. I hope this was interesting. I hope it was cool. This was much more kind of... I think this went deeper into my own psyche as a writer than I kind of wanted it to, so there were some things I didn't tell you. But that's really just for my own protection. The reading does confirm to me where I have been and where I am, and that the way forward is only to be what you are, and to find a way to make the things that you think have power over you sort of small, so that you can take your power back and kind of eat away at the lucky land that they think they inhabit. Anyway, that's that. Take care. Be good. We'll talk soon.